Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure and privilege to welcome you to the Federal Court and in particular to our beautiful ceremonial court. I do so on behalf of the Chief Justice, who regrets that he can't be here tonight to do so himself. Before I go any further, I acknowledge that we are gathered on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. Now, the Federal Court is a great supporter of Minds Count and its predecessor, the Tristan Jepson Memorial Foundation. I'm very proud of the fact that the Court is a signatory to the TJMF guidelines, and we do our best to adhere to the principles behind them. I pay tribute to the work of Mari and George Jepson, to whom we are all deeply indebted for their self-sacrificing commitment for many years to our welfare. I'm sorry that they're not here today so that they can join with us to listen to the lecture and to enable you all to pay your personal thanks to them. All that remains for me now is to introduce Cindy Penrose, who will then introduce our guest speaker, David Westgate. Cindy, for those of you who don't know her, is a director of Minds Count. She was a mainstay of the Tristan Jepson Memorial Foundation since its inception. She's currently the COO of the Paul Ramsay Foundation. She's also the mother of two beautiful children and my very dear friend, Cindy.
Thanks, Judge. I too acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we live and work. I pay my respects to them and their cultures and to elders past, present and emerging. Tonight I have the great pleasure of introducing our guest speaker, David Westgate, for the Minds Count 2019 annual lecture. David was a high-powered executive responsible for 20 employees and millions of dollars in client business, and spent the last 40 years building a successful career in multinational advertising agencies. Coincidentally, he has also spent the last 40 years battling bipolar 1. David knows what it's like to be driven by anxieties so strong. He sacrificed weekend after weekend to needless work. He knows what it's like to be so sleep deprived. His keyboard often resembled a soft, downy pillow. And he knows what it's like to present brilliantly in a boardroom 1 minute, only to find himself crying quietly in a toilet cubicle the next. In fact, he even knows what it's like to spend time in a mood disorder clinic. David is married to his wife of 35 years. He has 2 adult daughters, a house in Sydney's North Shore, and the occasional overseas holiday, I'm told. To meet him is to meet a successful man, but to know him is to know a struggle shared daily by millions of Australians. They are the people who wear stiff upper lips while carrying heavy secrets in their hearts. They are also the people who David now devotes his time to through mental health advocacy, speaking on behalf of the Black Dog Institute and creating workplace initiatives. He has been interviewed by the Australian Financial Review, appeared on Insight on SBS, created a corporate mental health and workplace initiative. 6 years ago, his passion and career began blending when he commenced as a keynote speaker for the Black Dog Institute. He has served on Black Dog Institute's Lived Experience Advisory Panel, along with the Mental Health Advisory Board for Australia's biggest insurer, TAL, and worked as a qualified mental health first aid facilitator. An acclaimed facilitator of mental health courses, empathetic and educational author, and speaker on mental health, who thinks insightfully and strategically on an issue costing business billions of dollars. David, we are delighted to hear from you tonight. David Westgate.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you. This is going to be very short now because Cindy's just actually taken half my speech from me. I'll just... here we go. Well, thank you, Cindy, and thank you all very much. It's an honour to be here today, although I'm slightly disappointed because when I was first approached to do this talk, I was promised that I could sit up in one of these seats and even wear a wig. So slightly disappointed, but...
We don't wear wigs.
Oh, don't you?
No, we're a modern couple.
Oh, all right. But I would have loved it. Nevertheless, I'm delighted to be here tonight. I'm very passionate about mental health and especially mental health in the workplace. And I can only imagine that with the profession of law, there must be some fairly stressful and very interesting workplaces from time to time. Okay. Let me start by saying this is not going to be a poor me piece. I am not here to look for sympathy. I am hopefully here to change a few minds. Now, as Cindy alluded to, I've worked in the creative departments of advertising agencies for about 40 years. And I don't know if you've ever seen the TV show Mad Men, which was about advertising in the 1960s, but I'm here to assure you that my career has never been anywhere near as glamorous. I never drank a bottle of scotch before lunch, and nor did I smoke 3 packets of cigarettes in a day. But I have worked as a writer in large multinational agencies. I've been a partner in a very small boutique shop, and I've even run my own agency. And throughout that entire time, I've suffered from a mental illness known as bipolar 1. Now, bipolar 1 is sometimes also likened to a trip on a roller coaster, as it comes with suicidal lows and absolutely incredible manic and sometimes psychotic highs. And I think the best description I can give you for a manic high is like stepping aboard a Saturn V rocket. After months of depression, I suddenly start to feel a bit better. And suddenly I'm feeling quite good, and the next thing I'm feeling a little too good. And I'll hear the countdown in my head and a roar of engines in my ears, and I'm taking off for the stars. During these highs, every morning I'll hop out of bed at about 3 or 4 a.m, full of beans, absolutely full of beans. And by the time the rest of Australia's starting to crawl out of bed to go to work, I've normally done a day's work. In fact, I once wrote a book in 2 months while holding down a fairly high-pressure job. And it was fantastic. It was a really good job. A great book, or so I thought at the time. And I read it again about a year ago, and I'm here to tell you it was absolutely crap. During my highs, I am hugely confident, even though I keep hearing my wife muttering something about no jury in the country would convict me. When I look in the mirror, I see a combination of these two guys. Instead of the 62-year-old short grey-haired man who's really looking back at me in the mirror. However, a few months of this high, and then suddenly I hear my engines start to splutter. And they cough and they splutter, and then suddenly they go eerily quiet. And the next thing I know, I'm hurtling back to earth at breakneck speed. I smash through the roof of my home, and I land perfectly on my bed in a very deep depression. And worse, given my arrogance and my behaviour during my high, sympathy isn't that easy to find. And consequently, and here Cindy's stolen a few of my lines, but because of this mental health issue I have, I do know what it's like to be driven by anxieties that are so strong that I've sacrificed many, many weekends to needless work. And I do know what it's like to be sleep deprived. So sleep deprived that indeed my keyboard did resemble a soft downy pillow. And it's quite true that I've presented brilliantly in boardrooms only to be 5 or 10 minutes later in a toilet cubicle crying quite softly and quietly to myself. And in fact, I do have spent time in a mood disorder clinic. Now, at first I pictured a Gothic mansion lit by lightning and with barred windows through which the blood-curdling screams of the mentally insane could be heard. Fact of the matter was, it was a bit more like a rundown Travelodge, only for very good reason, without the swimming pool or the bar. However, this place was full of fantastic fellow patients and also wonderful staff. And this is actually a shot of my room. Now, I mention this not to say, oh, look at me, poor me, but I mention this for the very fact that when my psychiatrist first suggested I could benefit from hospitalisation, I was absolutely devastated. I thought, no, these places are for the seriously ill, not for me. And the fact of the matter was, I was doing exactly what a lot of fellow Australians would do to me. I was judging through absolute ignorance, and that's the basis of stigma. Thankfully, I can tell you now from experience that people with mental illnesses are not to be pitied and they're not to be patronised. I can tell you now from experience that mentally ill people that suffer from mental illnesses, can be hugely successful and very, very strong. In my case, I've been very fortunate in life. While the failure rate for bipolar marriages is well over 93%, I've been fortunate enough to be married to the same wonderful woman for over 35 years. And some would say that this is proof that she is an angel. But I often wondered myself if she's just been too damn lazy to have ever looked around. I also have two wonderful adult daughters who have treated my sometimes bizarre behaviour with good grace and savage humour. And plus, until recently, I had one of the best mental health tools known to man, and that was a dog by the name of Benny. And this was taken in his year that he was studying for the HSC. And between you and I, he did far, far better than either of my daughters did. I also live in a lovely Sydney suburb and take the occasional overseas holiday. So, on one hand, life has been very good, very fortunate, and I cannot complain about it. But on the other side of the ledger, it's been quite a struggle as well. Now, when I was in my late 20s, I consulted a psychiatrist about my moods. And while it wasn't Sigmund, it may as well have been. As a young man, I was completely and utterly disillusioned with the experience. And I did what only a naive, macho young guy could do at the time, and I decided I'd be better off handling my mental health myself. And that's exactly what I did for the next 25 years, and I'm here to tell you it was the dumbest decision of my life. A decade ago, I did what I should have done a week after seeing this first psychiatrist, and I consulted another one. And this is not actually a photo of him, but symbolic of how he helped make me feel. And I finally started to get my life back in some semblance of order. So if there's only one thing you take from this talk tonight, please make it this. If you're not feeling particularly well, or you suspect you know a friend or a family member or a colleague who's not travelling all that well, do something about it. Don't be like me and sit back and think these things will rectify themselves, it'll all be fine, because they won't. Do something about it. See a GP or speak to somebody. Speak to that friend or that colleague. And I'll talk to this a little bit later. Now, according to the Bureau of Statistics, 20%, I'm sorry about the cropping on that, 20% of adult Australians will suffer from some form of mental illness in any given year. Now, when I first heard that figure, I was amazed, 1 in 5 of us, and this may sound a little callous, but I was also quite delighted because I realised I was anything but alone, and I realised that I was not some sort of freak. But obviously with 20% of people suffering, there's a massive knock-on effect for the rest of society. And whether that be you're caring for somebody or whether it be that you're just working a little bit harder because somebody in another department can't quite keep up at the time. Now, of course, as many of you gathered here, especially any of you who've been in law for many years will know, this 20% figure did not apply to the law for many, many years. For many years, the figure for law firms was actually 0%. And I have proof of this, even though it may be anecdotal. I know an ex-lawyer who was employed as a consultant by the Black Dog Institute. And his job was to wheedle his way into law firms and to talk to them about the cost of mental health issues, and then to sell them mental health programs from the Black Dog Institute. One day he contacted a leading Australian law firm, and when I say leading, it was right up there. Now, to save any embarrassment to anybody here tonight, we'll simply call this firm Wallace and Gromit. And we shall call this company, and we will imagine them as the law firm in the movie Philadelphia, who went out of their way to hire the wonderful and dynamic young lawyer Tom Hanks, and then spent the rest of their time trying to crucify him. Now, this consultant for the Black Dog Institute had secured a meeting with a number of partners from this firm, including, much to his delight, the managing partner. And he told me of how on the day of the meeting, as he began talking about the toll mental illness can take on highly talented and highly driven young executives, he could sense some of the younger partners starting to lean in a little bit. And they were obviously listening intently, and he was delighted. He was striking a chord, and he was moving in for the sale, until the managing partner at the end of the boardroom table leant in a little further and simply said, "We don't have any people like that at Wallace and Gromit." At which time all the younger partners in the room all leant back, and the consultant returned to the Black Dog Institute with his black dog tail between his legs. That is a true story from about 3 or 4 years ago, I was told that. But in fairness, I do think things are changing, slowly but surely. 2 months ago on Are You OK Day, I was invited to talk to a Sydney-based firm. And as one of the senior partners introduced me, he had this to say to his people gathered there. He said, "We used to tell our clients that our greatest assets went up and down in the lifts each day. But the fact is, we never believed a word of it. We happily worked them into the ground, and then we would find new people. But today I'm here to tell you that those days are gone. That is my promise to you." And only 2 weeks ago, this article appeared in the Australian Financial Review. I don't know if you saw it. Law firm brings psychologist on site as mental health wanes. In the first paragraph, a top-tier law firm has appointed an on-site psychologist in an attempt to act early to protect employees' well-being as lawyers' mental health, already acknowledged as being at risk, worsens in the wake of the Hayne Royal Commission. Take a bow, I believe, Clayton Utz. In the unlikely case that I am ever wrongly dismissed on mental health grounds, which is probably very unlikely as I'm self-employed, I shall be knocking on their door. But seriously, I mean, this to me is a no-brainer. I mean, the cost of recruiting brilliant young people, onboarding them, getting them up to speed, getting them introduced to clients and winning their trust, I mean, that cost must be huge. To simply work them into the ground then makes absolutely no financial sense whatsoever. I mean, there's not an elite sporting team in the world that would behave that way. No coach would expect their players to play at 110% day in and day out throughout injury and also possibly mental health issues. Excuse me. Now, the most common form of mental illness, not just in workplace, but in society in general, is by far depression. But let's not confuse depression with mood swings, which are simply part of daily life. I mean, you have a row with your partner, or you crash your car, or you wake up and it's Monday morning, and you may not feel that great. But the difference between that and depression is, come Friday afternoon, you're starting to feel a bit better. You kiss and make up with your partner, you're feeling better once again. You get your car fixed, you're feeling better. But suffer from depression and you simply cannot snap out of it. And please, if anybody ever says to you, I've been having a bit of depression, please never suggest that they snap out of it, because it's the equivalent of telling somebody with cancer to just get over it. It really is an impossible thing to physically do to snap out of depression. Things that would normally bring you pleasure no longer do. You feel isolated and alienated, and you can't sleep or concentrate, and you have very, very little in the way of energy. When I was a younger man and would suffer from fairly severe depressions, I would wake at 3 a.m. every morning. And it was remarkable. It was never 3:20, it was never 2:50. It might be 3:02, but it was pretty damn near 3 a.m. every morning. And when I did, I would wake wide awake. The first thing I'd do is start going through my to-do list for that day. And having done that, I'd go through it again and I'd start catastrophising it. I'd be thinking, what if this client doesn't like that? What if we haven't got the budget to do this? Etc., etc. What if I lose my job? It was just shocking. And then at about 5 a.m, I'd blissfully go back to sleep, only to be woken by my alarm an hour later. But the fact of the matter was, as I walked through the door of the agency, I would be the world's greatest actor. I'd be the smiling young professional, and even though I was a shattered wreck with inside, nobody ever knew. In 35 years of working in the agencies, nobody once said, "You're all right, you don't seem quite right today." So if you do ever feel yourself particularly down for more than 2 weeks in a row, you should consult a GP. And I'll just quickly go through a couple of tips for seeing a GP. Sorry, I think I will. Excuse me. If you need to see a GP about mental health, you should find one that actually knows a little bit about mental health, because not all GPs are created equal. That's not a shot at them, it's just that some are more interested in mental health than others. You'll have no problem whatsoever if you ring a doctor and say, "Do you know much about mental health?" Most of them will be more than happy to say, "Well, yes, I do," or "No, I don't, but I can refer you to somebody who does." The second thing to look for is to book a long consultation. If you're suffering from something such as depression, you are going to find your mind working fairly slowly, and doctors bill by 9-minute times. So the possibility that you get in and in 9 minutes you actually get to tell them what's happening is very unlikely. So book a long consultation. Also, tell your doctor the truth. Don't sugarcoat it. This is your chance to start getting better. There's no point going in and going, if you've been feeling absolutely miserable and you can't sleep and you haven't been eating, there's no point going in and going, "Oh, I've just been feeling a bit down from day to day." This is your opportunity to get things rolling. If you're finding it hard to concentrate, write your symptoms down. Your doctor will actually love you for that, because I promise you, if you don't, you're going to walk out of that surgery, and as you're looking around and realise you've forgotten where you parked your car, you're going to think of 3 things that you meant to mention to your doctor. And I will say this, especially for the men in the room, seeking help is a sign of strength. Living needlessly with mental illness is just sheer bloody-minded stupidity, and you can take that from an expert. Okay, moving on. And I love this slide. I'm sorry you can't read it. It goes, "I'm quitting my job to pursue anxiety full-time." And anxiety is the other common mental health problem that we find, especially at work. But everybody gets anxious from time to time. I mean, it's part of the human condition. When we lived in caves, it stopped us becoming a saber-toothed tiger's lunch. Even today, if your boss walks past you and they're not looking particularly happy and they say, "I'll see you in my office in 10 minutes, chances are you're going to get anxious. Or if your biggest client rings and says they're going to Wallace and Gromit because their firm has just employed Tom Hanks, chances are you'll get anxious. It's normal, and it can actually help you perform better. But some of us, however, worry far more than others, and often over things that others might consider petty. That said, if it's persistent and you can't control it, you need to see a GP about it. I often actually suffer from anxiety. In fact, I was once hospitalised in the belief that I was having a heart attack. I was under enormous pressure at the time, and I had a really, really savage chest pain. So I stupidly asked a colleague to take me to Royal North Shore Emergency rather than going for an ambulance. And once I reached the emergency department, they raced me straight through. The next morning, after I was cleared of any cardiac problems, the doctor suggested I may have had a severe anxiety attack, and he was quite right. It's amazing with the mental health issues how much they can show themselves through physical symptoms. But the moral of that story is, if you ever have to go to an emergency department, even if it's just for a sprained ankle, just say you have a little bit of chest pain, because they'll race you straight through. Now, My anxiety was primarily triggered by my work. I was the king of negative thinking and terrified of failure. Outwardly, I was a successful, confident young man, but inwardly, I was absolutely stupid. Why? Because rather than seeking professional help, I decided I would deal with it in my own way. And my plan for dealing with my anxiety was to work harder. Doing so would supposedly make my job safer, along with everything that I had built on that job. My wife, my children, my house, my holidays, even my dog. And once that was all safe, I could then relax. I could then be calm. So I devoted more and more time to my work. Start times got earlier, knock-off times got later, and weekends just whistled by without me. And it actually worked perfectly for my bosses. They adored me and they showered me with bonuses and pay rises and pats on the back. My wife and kids, however, suddenly got to wondering who I was, and the dog would growl menacingly at me as I walked through the front door. As for my anxiety, well, it just blossomed. I reached a point where I felt if I could just work Saturday and Sunday nights without my wife killing me, I would find the serenity that I so desperately sought. Years later, I am wise, well, at least wiser. I know that health and happiness cannot be sacrificed today as an investment for tomorrow. There is no savings plan or no compounding interest. My plan was a recipe for regret. Yes, work plays a very large part in a satisfying life, but so too do family and friends and relaxation and having fun. What I should have learnt all those years ago was to possibly have worked less and meditated more, or managed my overpowering need to please people, or consulted a psychologist, any one of which would have been far more beneficial than simply sacrificing yet another weekend to needless work. All right, let me take you through a few philosophies that are far, far more practical than mine was. And most of them come from Eastern cultures. Now, a few years ago, I used to believe that you had to have a long hair, a goatee beard, and wear cheesecloth to do anything to do with meditation or anything to do with mindfulness. But I have changed my mind dramatically over the last few years. I want to take you through two simple exercises, and one is really, really simple because it's something we take for granted, and it's called breathing. Now, the fact of the matter is, we all breathe from up here. I mean, I'd look absolutely stupid if I walked around all day going, I just look moronic. So we breathe from up here. But what happens when we breathe from up here? If we're put into a position of stress, we'll breathe quicker. And the quicker we breathe, the less oxygen we get into our system, and the harder and quicker our heart beats. So here's a little tip should you be going into a potentially stressful meeting, or you just want to chill out for 5 minutes or whatever. And it's simply called belly breathing. And it's as simple as this. If you close your mouth and you inhale slowly through your nose, and you can do this with me, just inhale slowly over a period of about 4 seconds and drag in a really big lungful of air so that you can feel your diaphragm and your belly coming into play. And you hold that for, say, 4 seconds, just whatever's comfortable, and then exhale it equally slowly, and then repeat that. So let's just do it. Just go. If you do that again. I guarantee if you do that before a big meeting or just when you might be feeling a little stressed, you will feel far, far better. If you do it for 5 minutes, you'll feel amazingly better. Basically, that is the basis of any meditation known throughout the world. It's a very simple. Every meditation starts basically with counting breathing. And there is no better way to relax yourself or to come back from a stressful event than to do that. I'll also just take you through one little exercise you can do with mindfulness, and we could do that. Oh, we could do it with the coat of arms. If you were to look at that coat of arms, at first you go, oh yeah, it's a kangaroo and an emu and they're holding up a shield. But if you really, really were to look at that coat of arms, you would see so much more. If, for example, you spent 2 minutes looking at it, you would see Australia underneath it, star above. You would see a coat of arms, but you would also see how the shield is made. You would see so much more. It's the same that applies to looking at a tree. If you look at it for a couple of minutes, you'll see much, much more. Now, the point of that little exercise is not to make you experts on the coat of arms. It's not to make you experts at that at all. The point is, when your mind is focused on looking at something and exploring something such as that, you can't be thinking of this afternoon's meeting. You can't be thinking, oh, what time do I have to pick the kids up? You can't be thinking, did I do a bad job this morning when I spoke to the partner about that? It's impossible because your mind is focused. It's a simple case of concentration. If you do that, you'll find you give your brain a little time out, and it's very easy to do. You can do that in your office. You can simply do it with any item around you. And once again, you'll feel a little bit better and a little bit more relaxed for having done so. All right, let's travel overseas for a few minutes. Now, I'm no platinum frequent flyer, and I'm certainly no member of the Chairman's Club, but I have travelled overseas quite a bit for work and also for holidays. And I can tell you from experience that there's nothing better than flying across the date line for turning good mental health into mental illness. I can tell you with absolute fact because I have dragged my suicidal sack of a body throughout the years through Disneyland. I have been the middle-aged man that never sleeps in the city that also claims to do the same. And I've also been completely loco in Mexico. That's me on the right in the Mexican wrestling mask and in possibly the world's worst ever selfie. But I have, however, had one successful overseas jaunt, and that was a 5-week journey to Italy with my wife about 2 years ago. And it was a success thanks to this. Carrying enough drugs to basically start my own small cartel, my psychiatrist giving my wife a crash course on psychiatry, and a combination of short flights, long stopovers, and plenty of exercise courtesy of 20,000 steps a day. Okay, let me move on to what I consider to be probably the most important part of this talk. In fact, one of the most important things I think you could possibly learn. But let me start with a fascinating anecdote about we used to holiday, the family and I, with a bunch of friends at a place called Diamond Beach, which is a tiny little place just north of Foster on the north coast. And we did it for 10 years, and we used to rent out this terrible old motel, and it was a really basic place, but in fact a friend of mine said it was like camping in brick. But it was wonderful for us because the kids could just run riot and they couldn't do any possible damage whatsoever. And my wife used to tell me that amongst the women, my mental health issues were a fascinating topic. They'd like to know, has he done anything bizarre lately? What's his psychiatrist like? How many pills is he taking at the moment? Does he rattle when he walks? But that said, surprise, surprise, the guys, we never said a word. And then one day I was standing on the beach and I was playing Daddy Lifesaver and I was watching the kids in the surf. And a good mate of mine, he came down and he stood beside me, and he's a big guy, a really nice bloke. And he stood beside me and he crossed his arms and he shuffled his feet into the wet sand, and you could sense that he was a bit uncomfortable. And he said to me, Sarah, and Sarah was his wife, he said, Sarah told me I had to come down and ask you how your pills are going. And I laughed and I told him they were going well. And to which he said, "Oh, thank God for that." And seconds later, we were talking about footy or beer or sex or whatever blokes talk about when women aren't around. Now, some people might have thought that my mate was being quite callous by that, but he wasn't. And I think any guys of my generation will know that, in a way, in male shorthand, he was actually going, "Look, I care for you and I'm here if you ever want to talk. It's just that we can do it in 10 words, where women will talk about it for an hour." Anyway, but my point is, my friend was not a psychiatrist, and nor was he a psychologist. He was just a caring mate, and that's all you really need to be able to talk to somebody if you're concerned that they may have a mental health issue. Now, I'm going to take you through 3 scenarios, and I promise you that speaking to somebody that you might be concerned about, there is no element of embarrassment. And yet I think that's what stops a lot of people. I think people fear saying the wrong thing. They fear the person running out of the room and screaming off, and I'm not being trivialising this, but take their own life, or I think they fear saying something that's so hugely embarrassing that they'll never be able to face that person again. And none of that is true. It is actually really quite simple to approach somebody who you fear is having a bad time of it. And I'm going to pretend that Cindy and I are good workmates. I also work at the Ramsay Foundation, and we're workmates. And every Friday morning at 11 o'clock we go out for a coffee. We don't see outside work or anything, but we're just mates, and we go and have a cup of coffee, and we have a good bitch and a laugh at the rest of you at your expense, which is all very healthy. But I noticed one day that Cindy just doesn't seem to have been herself of late. She's a bit snappy, and she seems a little bit down, and she hasn't been putting in her normal 20 hours a day as she does. And so I go to her and I talk to her. But the first thing I do is ensure that I talk to her in privacy. I'm not going to do this at the water cooler or the coffee in front of everybody. And I also ensure that I've got some time up my sleeve. There's nothing worse than going to somebody going, "I'm concerned about your mental health," and they go, "Well, yes, I'm having problems." You go, "Let's schedule a meeting for next week." You need to have some time up your sleeve. But that said, here's how it's done. It really is this simple. I'm sorry, I've missed a slide. It's that simple. I go to Cindy and I simply say, "Cindy, I've noticed, I don't know, you just don't feel quite yourself at the moment. You're a bit down, you're a little bit snappy, I've noticed. You're not sort of working as much as you would normally work." And scenario 1 is Cindy simply says to me, "Yes, you've completely misread that. I'm fine, I'm just really, really busy at the moment. I'm sorry if I've been short, I didn't mean to be, but I've just been really busy." And it's the actual truth. I've just simply misread the situation. Now, there's nothing embarrassing about that. In fact, Cindy thinks I'm quite a nice friend for having cared enough to have actually asked. The second scenario is I go to Cindy and I say exactly the same thing. "I'm a bit concerned, you've been a bit irritable, and blah, blah, blah." And the fact is, Cindy is having a few troubles, but she just lies straight to my face and she says, "I'm fine, I've just been really busy, I don't know what you're talking about." But I've just done something really special for Cindy, because even though she doesn't want to talk about it then, I've opened a door for her. And through that door she can step in a week or 2 weeks or a month, and she can say, "You know, when you asked me that day, well, the fact of the matter is I have been having a few troubles." And the other thing that suddenly occurs to Cindy, or possibly occurs to her, is going, "I'm not doing quite as good a job as hiding this as I thought I might, because David sort of picked me." Either way, Cindy thinks I'm a good friend. She's not embarrassed. And I walk away going, misread it again. Okay. The third scenario is this. I go to Cindy and I say, "Cindy, I'm a bit concerned about you at the moment. You seem a bit down, you've been a bit snappy, you're not working as much." And Cindy's eyes start to well up, and she's obviously got a problem. And so at that stage, I grab her and go, let's go for a walk. Let's go outside. And the point of going out for a walk is that we don't have to look at each other across a coffee. We don't have to look eye for eye, which is especially important for guys. If you're talking to another bloke, it's really good to be able to go out and be side by side, because then the problem's out there. You're not looking into each other's eyes. And at that stage, all I do is go, look, and I just try and get Cindy talking. And I say, oh, you just seem so down. You want to tell me about it? And you've got to remember at that stage that if Cindy is depressed, or even if she's suffering from anxiety, her mind's probably working a bit more slowly than it normally would. She might be slow at bringing things out, so you've got to remember to work at her timing. So I just ask her, and she starts telling me things. Now, even if Cindy tells me stuff that's completely and utterly irrational, she tells me that she's no good, she's concerned that her board of directors are going to get rid of her and none of the clients like her. And if I know all this to be wrong, I'm still not going to contradict her and go, no, that's rubbish. Because at that time, I'm only going to make her feel worse. All I'm going to do is go, oh, that must feel terrible to feel like that. And I'm going to be all ears and no mouth. I mean, it's human nature that we want to fix things for people. But at this point, you are not experts, and your job is there to be a listening board for her and a support. And all you're going to do at the end of that conversation is go, look, maybe you should be seeing a GP. And if you're really, really good friends, maybe you'd often go, look, would you like me to come along? We'll both go and see a GP. That's the third scenario. There's no embarrassment there. In fact, Cindy thinks I'm such a good guy that she's going to rename her firstborn child David, even if it's a girl, all right? That's the fact of the matter. There's nothing embarrassing. At that stage, you don't own Cindy's problem. I don't suddenly have to live Cindy's life. I just check in with her in a week or two and I go, hey, how are you travelling? Have you done anything? And Cindy hopefully says, yeah, I saw a GP, things are good, like we're talking, or I've seen a psychologist or whatever. I do not become living her problem for her, all right? That's all I do. It's as simple as that. The one thing we do not, and this is not a shot at are you okay, but we do not ask people, are you okay? Because the answer is yes, all right? That's a stupid way. We offer them what you've seen and let them speak their way out of it. All right. Thank you, Cindy. The other thing is, if Cindy doesn't have a friend and she's hiding a point, and that's not you, Cindy. But if Cindy's really good actor and she's getting by and I haven't picked it and nobody's come to her, Cindy has to talk out. Now, she has to seek help, and I'm here to tell you, you cannot let these things just go on and on, because they do not fix themselves. It's not like the flu. You don't go, oh, well, I'm better and I took no pills. That's not going to happen here. You need to seek help, and you also need to reach out. You need to reach out to a friend or a family member, and you need to speak to your GP. And you're big boys and girls, you can determine whether you do that within your firms, or if you're concerned about the culture of it, you go, well, I'll just seek help outside of it. But you do not sit there and simply tolerate it. Okay. All right, well, we're on the very home stretch. And I'd like to conclude by destroying the myth that mental illness is a sign of weakness. It is not a sign of weakness, and if you'll excuse my language, that is absolute bullshit. People who turn up to work day after day while battling depression or severe anxiety or even bipolar are incredibly strong people. And to me, the living proof of this is Sir Winston Churchill. For 81 years, this man turned up to work, and for much of those years, he had most of the free world looking over his shoulder going, I hope you get this right, I hope it's great. And succeed he did. He dragged Britain through the Blitz on his shoulders, and he helped put Hitler back in his box. He was also a brilliant orator, a prolific writer, Nobel Prize winner, and he wasn't too shabby an artist either. All of which was quite amazing given he suffered from clinical depression all his adult life. In fact, it was Sir Winston Churchill who coined the expression for depression, the black dog, because he said his was particularly loyal and it seemed to follow him wherever he went. Now, not even the most confident prosecutor could argue that Sir Winston Churchill was weak or that he was an unsuccessful soul. And I'd say that after 40 years of building a successful career while battling bipolar 1, I would like people to say that of me either. And people shouldn't be saying that about colleagues who battle on while hiding conditions. But here is the point of all of this rambling. I often wonder just how much more successful we all could be if people were not so scared that they felt the need to hide or they were too embarrassed to ask others if they were okay. If we didn't have to worry about some highly intelligent yet truly ignorant person saying, "We don't have any people like that here." The time has come to drag mental illness fully into the light and to normalise it. And that's something we all have a role in. Then, and then only then, can we be truly successful and reach our full potential. And with that, I rest my case, and thank you very much. Thank you.
I might ask Jerome's actually our questioner or moderator. I don't know if you know Jerome, but he's well known in the field of advocating for mental health within the legal profession. So Jerome, I might pass him on to yourself.
First of all, thank you so much, Dave.
Not at all, thank you.
Very engaging and stimulating discussion. I wanted to start the Q&A by asking you for a little bit of a comparison with the advertising world and the legal profession. Because when we discuss mental illness in law, we often compare to other professional services like finance, accounting, tax. But we haven't really spoken too much about the advertising and creative spaces. And I was wondering if, based on the decades you spent in the advertising world, if you think that there's any particular lessons from the environmental or professional realm of advertising that perhaps lawyers can take away. Is there anything that's transferable or applicable from advertising to law?
Possibly not. And the reason I say that is I think that advertising by its very nature tends to attract people that are slightly off-kilter, especially in creative departments. I know for a fact that, in fact, when my wife and I have known each other since we were 16, and she always tells people, she goes, "I married him because he said he always wanted to be a lawyer." But I tend to think that with my mental illness, I never would have survived in the law, because there were times when attention to detail and things like that just simply weren't going to work. But I think, so advertising was a great place for me to almost hide, and in some ways, like manic highs were a wonderful way for me to be able to release creativity and energy. I think with law, and also you'll find this also with, law, high finance, they have very high rates of mental health issues. Like I joked about the 20% before, but the actual figures for many of these areas are far higher than that. Although interestingly so too is advertising. I mean, I suppose the similarity is that we all run to deadlines, and we all have that. And I don't know about the law, but the advertising agencies have been decimated, and I was told by a friend of mine who runs a well-known agency that they now hire people, they expect to get about 1.5 workload out of somebody. So in other words, if they hire me, they expect to get the workload of 1.5 people. So a bit of a ramble, but I don't know. Certainly, like when you get into high finance, put Macquarie Bank up against law firms and stuff, you'll find huge similarities. But I think you're more brought on by pressures of work. Not everybody, but whereas in agencies it's more attracting interesting people to start with.
David, I might invite you to come down to the
Sure.
front here. We've hastily gathered some chairs for yourself and Greg Moore, who's another one of the board directors. And I wanted to sort of ask you both something.
We thought it'd be a bit more convivial. It's just a sort of a smaller group tonight, and we thought that maybe that's a little bit too formal and distant.
There are 3 chairs up there.
There are.
And I think it'd probably be good to touch on the nexus between success and ill health that you were mentioning, David, towards the tail end of that conversation, and how ill health shouldn't preclude one from achieving success in their professional realm. And it'd be good to ask both of you how best the legal profession can go about imbibing that idea amongst the law firms, but also amongst the individuals who make up those firms, because it certainly sounds like a very good idea, and one that I think we can all agree on. But actually being able to properly reinforce that idea and ensure that it is a comforting thing and people can actually feel secure and stable in their workplaces, as opposed to it just being a kind of a box-ticking idea or something that is said but not actually lived. How best can the legal profession actually ensure that that is imbibed?
I think it's probably starts off with good awareness, really, because I think the fact of the matter is, if you can spot people with issues, like I was earlier example with Cindy, it's probably it's not too late. It's always good to catch it, but you want to be trying to prevent these things. And I think that comes basically from awareness and programs. Like I do think, like, to see that the AFR about hiring psychologists is a fantastic thing, because I guess it's saying to the entire staff there going, we acknowledge these things, we want people to be cared for, we want this to be good. And I think those sort of things, in not just the law, but in any industry, are changing things dramatically now. And also, I spoke to a woman last week, I won't name any names, it was not a law for them. But she said, for mental health month this year, rather than getting somebody like Sophie to talk, or somebody from AMOK, whatever, one of our senior people said, I suffer from issues, and why don't I talk? And then suddenly from that, as soon as a senior person said, somebody beneath them said, well, I do too. And they suddenly had about 6 people in senior management around Australia going, well, I'll talk in Perth. And it's quite amazing. I think that more than anything just says a culture is open, because how else, like if you've got your boss going, I suffer, I know, blah, 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 you feel so much confident, more confident.
I'd just like to reiterate that idea of someone who has experienced or experiencing mental illness coming out within a professional, any sort of group. It's not just, lawyers perhaps are different in some ways, but if there was any message I was to get across to the group here, is that really what you experience in terms of mental ill health is what every other single group in Australia experiences. You aren't any different, really. That's really the bottom line. And the group that I'm dealing with, so I work as a psychiatrist at Westmead Hospital. You mentioned about how someone within a professional group comes and talks about it. It was illustrated for me, actually not amongst a legal group, it was actually a professional sporting group. I can mention this person's name because he has spoken publicly about it. 2 years ago, the captain of the New South Wales cricket team, it's a chap called Moses Omariks, was also captain of the Sydney Sixers 2020, for those of you who don't know anything about cricket, but he's a champion sportsman and well known by millions of people in Australia. But just before Christmas, I got a call from Cricket Australia saying that they thought he might need some pills before he went to Perth to play cricket. And that was the referral. So I saw him at Westmead, and he had suffered on and off depression. He was in his early 30s for probably 15 years. Seriously affected his sporting career. like I'm sure your illness affected your career. He was treated, made a spectacular response, actually had the best cricket season he had in over a decade. But this was the important thing. It was then written up, Gideon Hay, a cricket writer, wrote it up in the Australian Weekend magazine. The next week, I had 10 messages on my mobile phone from professional sportsmen. 10. And that's because one person opened up publicly and said, I suffered this. And it was like the aperture, it was a portal whereby colleagues, sporting colleagues around Australia, could do the same. And that's what happens in all fields, including the law.
And it's good that you mentioned cricket actually, because as some people in the audience might know, 3 Australian cricketers in the last fortnight have opened up about their mental health issues and have taken their names out of selection for the national team because they need to put their health and happiness first, which, at least for me, as somebody who's been passionate about cricket my whole life, is hugely heartwarming, comforting to see, but also at the same time heartbreaking to see heroes suffer like that. I do want to open the floor to questions in a little bit, but I do have just one more for you both. And it's based on the fact that neither of you come from the legal profession. And I think that everybody in this room can agree that it's hugely important for people to be proactive rather than reactive about their health and well-being, and ensuring that they're able to speak up if and where available and where necessary. But there are certain idiosyncratic circumstances that lawyers will be in that may preclude them from being able to open up and have a meaningful, substantive conversation. And the one that really comes to mind is for young lawyers who, and again, harking back to that thing you were talking about, David, about ill health not precluding from success. A lot of young lawyers may feel as though they're not able to speak up about anything they're going through until they've got to a certain level within the firm, until they have enough runs on the board to be able to justify any kind of supposed weakness or something that might hinder them from being able to succeed or earn money for the firm. And I hesitate to draw a false equivalent here, but it's quite similar in a sense, logically at least to me, for young women who feel like they can't get pregnant or start their family planning until they're at a certain level where their career progression is not going to be impacted. They're still going to be able to get promoted. And so I'm wondering, for those young lawyers who, as outsiders, how best do you think they can go about having those conversations in a way that's not going to hinder their career progression?
I would say, depending on their culture, they possibly don't. I think you would know your own culture, and you would know whether or not to talk out. Just as an aside, like I never said a word, and yet I worked with wonderful managers, really good people that I still see from time to time. But I was actually afraid not of losing my job, but I was afraid of having it killed by kindness, because I was actually thinking, wow, like these people might take me off major projects and put me to the side, but eventually the chief financial officer is going to come around and go, why are we paying this guy so much? But there's got to be cultures, and there still are. I mean, it would be naive not to think so, but there are still cultures that these sort of things are seen as a sign of weakness or whatever. And I think if that's dependent on your culture, if you feel good about your culture, then I'd suggest you talk to your manager and you have a private thing, and you make it obvious that you're not talking because you want sympathy, but you're talking out of respect, because you love your job and you love the firm, etc., and you want them to be aware of something. But I think if you're concerned that if by talking out, then it's just going to turn into, like you're suddenly blacklisted, you don't do it. But you do find help outside of it to deal with your mental health. That's the thing. That's the thing I never did. I just went, oh, I just tolerate this by myself. And my lucky wife was the one who got to see all and nobody else did.
I think I should emphasise for those of you who aren't familiar with bipolar disorder, this is not a trivial illness. So about 1%, maybe 1 to 2% of Australians have bipolar disorder. When you're high, you can be so high that you lose touch with reality, as David has mentioned. I had a patient once who, when he was manic, it's high, found himself in Bondi Beach. And he hatched this brilliant plan that if he could sell to the Japanese the grain of sand of Bondi for $10 at a time, he'd become a billionaire. And he held that thought for a couple of weeks, until inevitably that grip of black depression grabbed him. And a week or so later, he found himself sitting on the harbour bridge, looking at the water below, contemplating. Bipolar disorder, before we had effective treatments, which was up until the late 1950s, 15% of people took their life with bipolar disorder. That's a bloody lot of people. And the discovery of the first effective treatment for it was actually an Australian discovery. It was actually lithium for bipolar disorder, made by John Cade, a Melbourne psychiatrist. It was Australia's greatest discovery in the history of mental health.
I believe it's a very good book.
It is a delightful book, but we won't talk about that at the moment. But bipolar disorder, I think it's important to know this is a serious illness which devastates the individual's lives and families' lives. I had a patient recently who walked down Oxford Street and bought 2 Porsches in half an hour, and he had a cent to his name. Not a cent. So we had to write furious letters trying to explain that he was manic. And getting back to that crippling concern within all kinds of corporations, the fear of speaking up and telling someone that you're unwell or seeking help. Whether it be the Australian national cricket team, whether it be a high-powered law corporation, what cripples people, in my experience, is confidentiality, or the fear of lack of confidentiality. That's what thwarts the majority of people in seeking assistance.
A little bit of time for some questions from the audience, if anybody has anything they want to ask. Yes?
I can just speak.
Sure.
We're going to be on here.
Okay. Thank you so much, firstly, for your speech. It was wonderful. I wonder whether you've come across any bosses, CEOs, who previously were like the man in the photo, completely uninterested and blind to any mental health issues around them, who was eventually turned around. And I wonder if you share that and share how they were turned around.
I know plenty of CEOs for the first kind. I honestly don't know of anybody, I've never heard of anybody yet that's turned things around and gone, yeah, all right. I mean, although I must say that the law firm I spoke to, Are You OK Day, I mean, they were very open about their attitudes and how they've been. So I didn't know them, but there was obviously a senior partnership team there that were going, hang on, this is going to be good for people, this is going to be better business for us to treat people this way. And so they'd obviously done that, but I think I've not mentioned any name whatsoever, but I had a call from somebody, like a really switched on person in a law firm. They had 2 degrees other than law, and they messaged me, and I've got this very small mental health initiative, and she said, oh, I want to talk to you about it, and blah, blah, blah. I went, okay, like, this is just through email. So can I ring you on the weekend? And I went, oh, yeah, fair enough. And obviously very busy during the week. So she rang me and was talking. And I'm thinking, oh, this is fantastic. I'm going to be able to do my spiel. And lo and behold, she said, I want to know how you get to do what you're doing. Because, and this was this year going, I'm fed up with this. And I'm looking at the culture of my company, and I'm looking up at the people above me, and I don't want to be like that. So I think there's still some good old-fashioned ones that go, this business model's not broken, let's not change it. So it's a great question, but I don't know anybody of anybody personally.
One up the back, one right up for you.
Hello.
Hello.
The speech, it was wonderful.
Thank you.
So just wanted to ask about the duality between, it's not only just about speaking up in the first place and acknowledging that there's something you're struggling with, but the next thing is the strength to actually go in and get help, which is sometimes more than people have in the tank at the time. And I just wanted to ask if you had any sort of advice for supporting people once you started that discussion about mental health and they've said, yeah, I think I need help, to support them to commit to that, to see it through and actually make changes for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Getting the steps.
I just start by saying a lot of anxiety and depression, these can be very insidious sort of illnesses. They're not it's not like getting the flu. The flu sort of introduces itself, and a couple of days before you have a bit achy, you run down, and then 2 days later, bang, you're down, and you might be out for 3 weeks, whatever nowadays. But with anxiety or depression, you can often just slide into it, and you get to a point where you think to yourself, I'm not feeling all that well, I really don't feel great, and then you fool yourself and you go, but I think this is probably what everybody goes through and everybody's feeling like this. When in actual fact, they're not. So you've got to have real strength to go, you know what, and I think it's your responsibility to yourself. You wouldn't do it if you physically felt poor all that time. You go and see a doctor, and you have to be smart enough to go, I'm not feeling well, or I'm really anxious and uptight all the time. And it's not just because of work stresses, there's something more to that. But I think I've been incredibly fortunate. When I finally reached out, I didn't do so until I was in my early 50s. But by that time, I had an amazing support network of my wife, my kids, they were old enough. It's not like the little 5-year-olds or anything like that. I'd say, if you put your hand up and you go, I'm going to speak to a professional, whether it be a psychologist or whatever, it's great if you can have a friend or a partner or somebody that you can talk to, but not overdose them on it and not inundate them, because sometimes I think it's harder on people who are carers and people related to people who have illnesses. And I would say I've had a better life probably than my wife, and I'm not being funny about that. I know I make jokes about it, but reality is I think I've had it easier than she probably has. But having somebody like that to help you and support you and to push you every now and then, and even now I go so you been to see John, that's my psychiatrist, because if I'm good, I'm good. And they'll go, no, just say, well, shouldn't you check out it's been 4 months? Just go and see him. But that's really helpful, because otherwise you find I haven't seen him for 18 months. And for all I know, because it's hard to read when it's yourself, you could have been all over the shop.
So, David, do you have any? Do you have any advice for family and carers? Obviously you've talked about how lucky you were in relation to your family and support you got from your family, but so it is also very hard on them. So, what advice would you give to people who are carers?
Yeah, you can speak to my wife. I don't. It's. And I'm not doing this as a cop out, but it's. As Greg said, bipolar is a really pretty debilitating mental illness, and often you've got no idea. It wasn't until actually only maybe 4 or 5 years ago that I got to a point where I go, I'm fortunate, and I owe thanks to a lot of people. Even I had one workmate in the last few years that he did amazing things for me. And I, finally, about 3 years ago, we were sitting having dinner one night, and I said, I owe you a big thank you. And he went, what for? I said, because you've been sensationally good to me, and I never ever thanked you. I just took it for granted. Because when you have a mental illness, you're incredibly wrapped up in yourself. But I think that the advice for carers is while it sounds callous, but to try and not make that problem entirely their own. To force some form of responsibility on the person, especially to take care of themselves. You cannot, I don't think you can have a mental illness and be told what to do, and if for example, you've medication or whatever, if you're taking yourself from booze, I don't think you can get any sympathy or deserve too much caring if you don't do what you've been advised professionally to do. So I would say that, and then it's just, it's up to the individuals. It's hard going, I know that for a fact.
Does anyone else have any questions? Oh, yes.
Hi. Just to follow on, especially on this question saying to you, the psychologist, I already wrote your name. So we say, and I think it is a true fact that, especially with young people, the stigma of people finding out about them having an illness and the confidentiality issue that's involved with them disclosing or wanting to seek help. If we find someone who, which I have, because I have worked as a psychologist in the past, but I don't do it anymore. But if we find someone that has a problem, we do suggest them to go and see their GP. What happens if they don't want to see the GP? What happens if they are taken by a family member to see a psychiatrist or psychologist, but they don't want to disclose anything? They deny they've got a problem, but they have a problem. They are suicidal, and you can diagnose that. What do you do with these kind of people? Because these are the people in society that if we don't help them, and they don't want help, they're not willing to change, these are the ones that end up taking their life at the end. How do we deal with someone like that?
Well, that's my daily work you've described. I remember once when I was a junior, so I'm a psychiatrist, and I remember when I was a first year registrar, and one of my mentors said to me, Greg, by the time they come to see you, you know that you're the last cab on the block. They've seen everyone else, because most people want to see everyone but a psychiatrist. And there's a thread of truth in that, because we don't want to be at that lower state. But the issue of someone who might need and benefit from assistance, but refuses to seek that assistance, that wasn't a joke, that's a daily issue in psychiatry. Half the patients in our wards at Westmead Hospital, Cumberland Hospital, are there involuntarily. They've been scheduled. They've reached such a point, you take bipolar disorder, such a deep depression, suicidal depression, they've stopped eating, stopped drinking, they're dehydrated, rampantly suicidal, or they're manic and spent the family fortune and they've been scheduled. And those patients, once they reach that point, of course, the Mental Health Act takes over. But you're talking about, I think, a more subtle issue, wherein someone might have severe anxiety, depression, might be substance abuse. And you can see the damage they're inflicting on themselves and others. They may or may not be able to see that, but when you speak to them, they don't want to accept help. So what happens? Well, in a large number of cases, unfortunately, there's little you can do other than be supportive and try and offer avenues for support and help over a period of time. I'll tell you what happens in the majority of situations. A crisis hits. Someone's depressed and all of a sudden his wife threatens to leave. Bam! And they try to take their life. An ambulance is called, police are called, they come into the emergency department, that's when I see people. That's what happens to the majority of those people. Things just accumulate until a crisis hits. If a crisis doesn't hit, well, you don't give up on someone. And most families don't give up on people. But sadly, and certainly throughout my professional career, I've had a number of patients commit suicide. And often it's been around that issue that you talk about, that they've neglected or been non-compliant with treatment, have decided they don't want care, despite the urgings of family and friends. And it's tragic all around. I think sessions like this, and broadening the discussion and deepening the understanding of mental illness is not going to stop all those issues occurring. That's unrealistic. I noticed that there's a campaign about 0 suicides in society. I'm not sure where they got that phrase from, but it's not a phrase that I would ever use, because there are a myriad of things that go into suicidal behaviour in mental illness, only some of which we understand and have a handle on.
No. It's your especially that one.
Hi, thanks very much. That was really, really great talk.
Thank you.
So the question I have is sort of, it's brought on by various projects I've been involved with, which are about reconnecting people in the workplace or in the broader sort of professional community. And that is about getting people together over lunch or over some other function. So actually having physical face-to-face conversations rather than, you know, the wall of electronic communications that characterises the modern world. And there's a lot of literature, as you guys would know about that, about the importance of creating those social networks, etc. My question is, what about the people who don't turn up, who don't, you know, because they're voluntary activities, don't turn up to the lunches or don't register for the functions, or, you know, it's a birthday cake for someone's birthday, they don't come up out of their office. Is the advice to then go to them and ask them, you know, why are you not here? In other words, to be inquiring, or is it to let them come forward and talk in their own time? In other words, are these events good for a large number of people, but are they perhaps exclusionary for other people who may be suffering from a mental illness or a concern, and they don't want to bring that to the community sort of table or event?
Yeah. I suppose it depends on people too. Like, it's not always like mental health, and some people I just like keeping to myself. But I must admit, when people are ill, especially with depression, like alienation, people will try and isolate themselves. Getting away from people, it's easier to deal with things. You like nothing better than the same bed and pull an Uber over your head if you're at work. And I do the same. I used to do that. Like, nobody knew, and you'd push through, and you'd sit class. And my greatest thing now from people is, you, all the time, you. But I would deliberately avoid, like, very early on, I say, oh, I'm a bit busy, because I just didn't want to chew up my energy socialising with people. Not because I didn't like the people I worked with or anything like that, but I just, it was going to take too much strength to do that. So I suppose if you've noticed a change of behaviour, people who are normally gregarious and would be there all the time, and suddenly they're not doing it, I suppose that's one thing, and that might justify talking. But if there are people that are just trying to be going, I can't be bothered maybe about people's birthdays or whatever, that's a whole different issue. But if it was something that, you know, this person's normally fun and full of beans and they're here and then lately they haven't been turning up to anything, sure. And like I said, you're not going to embarrass anybody by someone who's going to go in a sort of accusatory sort of thing. You just inquire. It's well worth a chat.
can't frog march everyone into doing what you want, and I think you know that answer anyhow. It's a matter of being realistic, and I think what you're trying to do with those behaviours is create a climate, a culture, or an atmosphere of cohesiveness within your workplace, wherever it is, where people can feel supported, acknowledged, and so on. And that's not going to be for everyone. It doesn't matter where you are or what time it is. And as I think David said, there might be individuals who don't partake of that, but it is worthwhile reaching out to and trying to assist and see what's going on. But there'll be other people for whom that's not going to work. I think you just have to acknowledge that. I think it's important to have talked about depression, bipolar disorder. We've talked about the law and business. And I think we're going to finish shortly, but what I want to finish up, at least from my point of view as a psychiatrist, is that there are incredibly effective treatments. You know, one of the things that stops lawyers, test cricketers, whomever it is, from seeking help is they don't think anything helps. And that's rubbish. That is complete and utter rubbish, because I can tell you, and I know, there are plenty of lawyers in Sydney who have bipolar disorder. Plenty. And there are plenty of doctors who have bipolar disorder, who live largely very fulfilled and successful lives. These illnesses are eminently treatable.
I might have to leave the Q&A section there. Please join me in thanking David and Greg. And now we're going to move to the final part of the formalities, which is to bring David Field up here to present the first annual Lions Council Awards.
Thank you, Jerome and David and Greg. So we're almost there in the home straight. So we launched the Minds Count Annual Awards this year to recognise leadership in mental wellbeing in Australian legal workplaces. There are many other award programs around in the Australian legal profession, and increasingly these programs are including awards for wellbeing and mental health. But we thought it was important that we should also be playing our role in recognising and encouraging leadership in this field, as well as using the opportunity to compile a survey of best practice in the profession. There are two categories in the awards. There is the award for Best Mental Wellbeing Initiative in a Legal Workplace for organisations, and the award for Individual Leadership in Legal Mental Wellbeing for individuals. The winners were chosen by an independent panel of leaders in the profession, totally external to the Minds Count, to Minds Count and the board. And so, can I take this opportunity to express my thanks to the panel. The criteria for the award for organisations are leadership commitment, innovation, effective implementation, staff awareness and participation, and prioritised targeting of meaningful issues. The nominees for this award this year were Herbert Smith Freehills, Shine Lawyers, and Telstra Corporation Limited. Could you please join me in congratulating all of the nominated organisations for their leadership and contribution to building a stronger and more sustainable profession. The winning organisation this year had a global statement of commitment to health and wellbeing launched by its CEO, managing partner and COO. It launched a program of trained mental wellbeing champions in addition to its formal counselling programs, with over 150 people trained as champions across Australia, and an in-house psychologist who is available for face-to-face or Skype meetings. The organisation also launched its This Is Me campaign, featuring videos of people from across the business speaking about their experiences of mental health and encouraging other people to do the same. The culture of the winning organisation, the effective destigmatisation, is such that conversations about going to see Dr. Chris have become commonplace. The winner of the Minds Count Foundation Best Mental Wellbeing Initiative in a Legal Workplace for 2019 is Herbert Smith Freehills. So here to receive the award on behalf of Herbert Smith Freehills is Danielle Kelly, Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion.
Thanks
very much, David, and thank you for the keynote tonight, David, and also for your comments, Greg. Really insightful. First, I'll just say a few words. Firstly, acknowledge that we meet here on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Delighted to receive this award, and I wanted to just acknowledge that this year, 2019, it's actually 5 years since Herbert Smith Freehills signed up to the then Tristan Jepson Memorial Foundation guidelines for workplace psychosocial wellbeing, now known as the Mind Count guidelines. And since that time, I think we've been on a journey as a firm in terms of actually looking at some of the systemic things that we can do to improve our culture to be one that supports our people to thrive. And one of the workplace factors that we've been particularly focused on is the one around that natural human need to feel a sense of autonomy and purpose and a sense of control over the work that we do. And as lawyers, there's always going to be an inherent sort of butting up of that human need with the ever-expanding client demands. And so a lot of the work that we've done in the mental health space is really focused on how we can get better at supporting our lawyers to address that inevitable tension. And so you mentioned that we've trained a number of mental health champions. We're now at sort of over 250, and 2 weeks ago we launched our first global mental health strategy. So I commend Mind Count Foundation for the work that it does in this space. When I started in the legal profession back in the 90s, we were certainly not having any conversations about mental health, and I think it's testament to the work that you've done, the foundation and others, around workplace mental health, that we are now having really good discussions like the one tonight, and so I'm really pleased to be part of that discussion. Thank you.
The criteria for the award for individuals are leadership, innovation, impact, and meaningful contribution. The nominees for the award this year were Azita Sadeghi from Cummins Inc., Katarina Smolcic from Telstra Corporation, Andrea Tay from Telstra Corporation, Clarissa Raywood from the Brisbane Family Law Centre, Joseph Wheeler from the International Aerospace Law and Policy Group, and Tanya Murdoch from the Queensland Law Society, among many other roles. So please join me in congratulating all the nominated individuals. So from my perspective, it's particularly gratifying to see the strong representation from the in-house legal community. The winning individual describes themselves as an accidental wellness advocate in lawland. The individual has been running a weekly podcast on wellbeing in the law for some 3 years, which has now been listened to more than 250,000 times. The individual has also fallen into coaching and mentoring other practitioners on the business of law, with a particular emphasis on the practices and skills that allow lawyers to achieve happiness. This person published their book, Happy Lawyer, Happy Life, How to Be Happy in Law and Life, in early 2016, and it is Clarissa Raywood from the Brisbane Family Law Centre. And also delighted to see Clarissa's mum come down from Brisbane with her.
Thank you. I did travel with my mum, and those that know me know that I never prepare speeches, but I actually did, because this award, when I received the email from David, or my team did, this one really means a huge amount to me. I'm going to try not to get emotional, but you'll understand why in a minute.
You can get emotional.
So, 5 years ago, Justice Virginia Bell delivered the then Tristan Jepson Memorial Foundation address, and in doing so, she referred to the words of her former colleague, Justice Mason, who said, when describing our role as lawyers, you will experience considerable pressure to conform to cultures of the firm, the set of chambers, the government department, and the faculty. This collective embrace is appropriate insofar as it educates, encourages, and helps maintain proper professional standards, but never forget that as individuals, you have the opportunity to project your values and your ideals into your chosen calling. Conversely, your personal well-being and the integrity of your life and belief system are vital to your ability to function as a legal practitioner. You're a person first and a lawyer second.
Justice Bell's speech and this statement have stuck with me since I first heard it. That was about a year after I began my personal pursuit of this idea of happiness. To hear such successful members of our profession speaking of the need to be people first gave me the courage to be just that. Fast forward 5 years, and as David said, I'm still a lawyer, and I would say a happier one, because now through my side hustle, Happy Lawyer, Happy Life, I get to work with lawyers all around the country who are equally interested in reshaping our profession. My work in the space of wellbeing and happiness began as a selfish pursuit, a desire to find a way for me to be the person I am in the place that I do like to call Lawland. But 3 years ago, my family lost my youngest brother to suicide. Our lives changed forever that day, and all my talk of happiness seemed so trite. But Gareth's death brought a new purpose to my work. A reminder that the fragility of life and why we need to live it to the fullest is the thing that really matters, I think, at the end of all of this. Oh, this was not meant to happen. This is why I wrote it, though. I now know that my talk of happiness has created a space in our industry that is not usually associated with anything to do with the word happy, for a focus on the person, not the lawyer. Thank you, sir. The lawland I work in is changing, and I think for the better. But there's still a long way to go. I'm excited to see what the lawland of the future can be if we allow our collective humanity to lead the way. I am deeply honoured to receive this award this evening, and I thank all of you at Minds Count for the work that you're doing each day to improve our profession. But I do particularly want to acknowledge the incredible efforts of Murray and George Jepson. I had the privilege of meeting Murray a number of years ago. Their work and the legacy of their son has left something that will never be forgotten. And I think that, for me, in terms of tonight, David and Greg and all of the amazing speeches, I just think it's so beautiful that people are coming together and having these conversations about things that matter so much in life. So thank you for putting up with my tears and my words.
Thanks for that. I will say that I look forward to receiving an absolute explosion of nominations when we announce the awards again next year. Two very quick announcements. Firstly, to note that next year we're going to be running a series of signatory events to allow signatories to share learnings and best practice, so please do look out for them. Likely to be sort of, breakfast before work or sort of drinks immediately after, so do look out for those. Secondly, there will be drinks and nibbles, so please stay and join us for drinks and nibbles, I think in the room just downstairs here. And then finally, to thanks, I'd just like to thank Justice Alsop and Justice Katzman in the Federal Court for our wonderful venue here tonight. I'd like to thank David Westgate for being our keynote speaker, and also Jerome and Greg for the Q&A session. I would like to thank Stephanie Turner and Camilla Gray for all of your hard work in helping us to sort of pull together the logistics. I'd like to thank Anna Laycock for her assistance in pulling together the annual awards, and I don't think I said our sponsors DLA Piper and McCabe Kerwood, and then also our volunteers from Swab Lawyers. With that, thank you.